Today I'm going to show you one of our most common systems, iConnectivity power dual combos that's out there, and that's the Play12 and the mioXM. A lot of people use these in live events, live arenas. It's just the power combo. It's got your redundant audio and MIDI setup, and I see these all over the place. This can work with a Play12 and any other of our Ethernet connected devices, but the mioXM is very commonly used. Sometimes multiple mioXMs are commonly used. But I'm going to show you a single one, and hopefully this gives you some insight to the setup. If you don't know what a redundant rig is, basically you have two laptops with the exact same sessions running the same information, and the Play12 is actually going to switch from machine A, if it fails, to machine B. So basically a main computer to a backup computer. So this is fantastic in a live scenario. If something happens, someone pulls out a cable or any type of failure happens on the main computer, it switches over to the backup computer, and you can actually have a switch back over when the main computer comes back in. We won't bother with that today, but there's a lot of great options here, and this is fantastic for live use, and we see it all the time. It's one of the main rigs I would imagine is used in loads of artist setups today. So I'm going to show you how to actually set that up. So I'm going to show you on the screen here, Play12. So physically, how we're going to connect this is we're going to run USB port 1 to computer A, USB port 2 to computer B. We are going to run an Ethernet cable from the back of the Play12 into a switch. You don't have to run it into a switch. You can technically run, if you're just connecting to one device via Ethernet, you can actually run direct Ethernet cable from the Play12 into the mioXM for this scenario. But in this case, as you can see, I have on my desktop here, you can see I have a ton of devices connected. They're all connected to a switch, and my computer is connected to the same network switch. So you can do it that way. So the Play12 Ethernet port connected into the switch, the mioXM Ethernet connected into the switch. I have a few USB controllers that are actually hooked up right now. I think I have two of them connected to my mioXM, so I'll show you that when I go to set it up. I also like to connect USB from my mioXM to the computer when I do the initial setup. Before you start any of this, make sure you have the most recent firmware on your devices. You can do that by clicking on this little I button here, and you'll see the firmware version. Also, you would see a little triangle, kind of like on my Mio 10 over here, if the firmware is not up to date or it's a wrong version of the firmware. Orange, like the yellowy orange, means it's an update, but it's not vital. Red means you absolutely need to update. So if you're ever wondering what that is. So let's actually jump in to getting these guys set up. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the RTP network setup here. So the Play12, if I click on RTP network, only has 4 RTP MIDI ports. And if we go over, I'm going to go over to the 88 serial number here. And if I look at RTP, it actually has 12. You can see that I currently have the first 6 ports connected. That's actually connected to this computer. But yeah, all we have is 4 ports on the Play12. So we have to somehow condense our 12 physical possible connections on the mioXM into the 4 RTP ports on the Play12. My personal preference, and this depends on how many MIDI devices are going to be connected in your network. If I have 1 or 2 mioXMs, what I'll do is I'll take 2 ports from each. So in my case here, I'm going to show you how to take it all onto RTP port connections. So the 4 DIN ports and the possible 8 host ports going to the Play12. So we're going to do it that way for this setup. And the reason I use 2 is I use 1 for all the DINs and 1 for all the host ports. If I have 3 or 4 mioXMs that I'm connecting to a PA12, then I'm going to have to limit one port per port, and then everything's going to go through that one single port. Remember that a single MIDI port has 16 channels. So if all your devices are on different channels, then they're all going to have separate flows, and you can also filter or remap by those channels, so you're not going to have any real issues doing that. The reason we're connecting the mioXM directly to the PA12 and not to the computer is because the PA12 does the switching from the main computer to the backup computer. So all the MIDI will come into both computers at the same time, no matter which scene it's on, but the MIDI out will switch from computer A to computer B. And this is just so you don't get any like hung notes. You don't get any, when it does the failover switch, it cuts off all that MIDI data and switches, instead of getting some stuck notes and that kind of stuff when you're trying to switch over. We don't want any of that silliness, especially in a live scenario. So let me show you how to actually get that set up. So let's jump over to our mioXM 008. There it is. And let's go to RTP/network. And we can use any two RTP MIDI ports here. I'm just going to use the first ones. But yeah, you can use any of them because we're going to have to reroute the MIDI the way we want to set it up anyway. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to copy this information right here, which is the bonjour name. You can see it matches over here. So we're going to copy that. Let's go back to our PA12. We're going to go to RTP/network. We're going to switch the first port here into initiator mode. So click on the little responder drop down and select initiator. There's IP and name. It should be on name by default, and that's asking for the bonjour name, which we just copied. So let's paste that into this field, and then we're going to click save. And we should see the connection come up. There we go. So you'll see the IP and port number right there, and you can see the device name, which is connected to a mioXM. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the second port. So I'm going to click the drop down, go to initiator, paste it in, but change the last number to 2 instead of to 1. And we're going to click save, and that should make a second connection. So now we have our 2 connections. Just as a note, you don't necessarily have to have the PA12 as the initiator and the XM as the responder. You can actually do the initiator as the XM and the PA12 as the responder, as long as one is initiating the session and the other is responding to the session. That's all you need, is you need one of each in order for it to connect up. Whichever way you decide to do that is your choice. I like doing it from the PA12 mostly because sometimes I have a bunch of different devices connected, and I find it easier just to do it in one place over here, and leave the XMs and and the other connected gear as defaults. So let's start the MIDI routing portion of this by following our route. So basically, I'm going to go over to my XM here, and I have some devices connected in the host port. So if you have devices connected to the host port, you need to go into USB host reservation, and you have to actually select them in these drop-down lists. If you don't select them in the drop-down lists, these devices could show up in any port at any time, depending on how they powered up and how quick they wanted to connect. So make sure you're reserving those devices in. So I'm going to select the Air Mini. You also notice that a lot of devices will show multiple ports. You have to check with the manufacturer what information is being sent on those ports. 90% of the time, it's going to be port 1. So, and this one that just says port 1 right here is actually either my launch pad or my launch control. They're just older devices. They don't give the full name on the USB description. So we'll select that as the second device. So let's do that. And now let's look at some MIDI routing. So let's say we want it to go from our launch control from the XM through Ethernet to the PA12 via USB into your computers, and then you want it to control Ableton And you also want Ableton to send light feedback, because a lot of controllers get light feedback, like the APC 40 is a common controller, or Launchpad or Launch Control. They get some feedback on them. So I'm going to show you like the whole process of how that would kind of work. So in host 2, I have the launch control, I believe, is actually what's connected into there. So let's kind of run that route and show you how that works. So let's go into MIDI routing. So let's start with the DIN connections. So I want all of my DIN connections going to RTP1. So all my DIN connections are going there. So if I click on DIN 1 under the DIN section here, we can see it already happens to be going to RTP1. It also goes to the USB DAW port, which we're not bothering with, so leave that as default. DIN 2, you can see now that it's gone to RTP2, which is going to be for my host port. So let's deselect that and send it to RTP1. Let's go to DIN 3, and we'll go to RTP1, DIN 4, RTP1. You can kind of see the pattern on that. So now we're done with sending the DINs to the RTP network, which means right now all my DINs are going through RTP1 right through that whole long lineup I said into Ableton. And I'll show you how that kind of is seen and set up on that side. We're going to skip setting up the device port on this because we're not using that port, and we need to go to host port. So under the hosted instrument, hosted device / instrument, I'm going to select host 1, and you can see it's by default it's set up to go to RTP5. We want it to go to 2 because that's the second connection that we've set up for the PA12. Then we're going to go through all these guys, and we're just going to do RTP. I'm not going to bother to name them on this side. I could name them right here and call this launch. I don't know if they spell it with a K like NI does. We'll go with launch control. Yeah. So you can rename the ports. I don't see really much point. The only thing that you're going to see in your DAW is the names on the Play-Audio-12, which I'll talk about later. So we need to make sure that these are all going to RTP2. Now, you might not use all these, but I like to set them all up to go to RTP2. If I decide to expand something or we want to connect something up real quick later, then it's already set and I don't have to mess with it anymore. So that section's done. So now we have the controllers going to the mioXM. mioXM has already got that RTP setup that we did initially to the Play-Audio-12. And if we go to the Play-Audio-12, we'll see, so RTP1, which is this one right here. Sorry, I scrolled all the way down to the bottom in the MIDI routing here. We can see that's going to a Jack 1, RTP1, which is USB. When it says Jack 1, it means USB port 1. And then also Jack 2, RTP1. So if you want, you could actually rename these here if you decided you wanted to do that. Renaming these ports under the device port to DAW is where you need to name them. So you can name them from here or you can name them from over here. It's up to you. I'm going to name them in here because I can see the two that correspond. So I would probably, instead of saying RTP1, I might just call it XN DINs. I like that. So, and I'm going to do the exact same for the second computer. Make sure that these are the same. And the reason you want to make sure that these names are exactly the same is because when you copy your session over, usually you'll make your live session on one computer and then copy it to the second computer. When you copy it to the second computer, if the names aren't identical, then you're going to have to reconnect all the MIDI ports on your second device. And that's just extra time that you don't need to spend when you can just copy it correctly in here. It takes 2 seconds. So that's all we need to set up in here. It's done by default, so all we need to do is rename. And I'm going to do the same for this. And I'm going to call this host, XM hosts, right? And I copy it. And we'll paste it into here. And there we go. So that part's done. So we've got everything from the XM into Ableton. but how do we get from Ableton back out? So, good question, my friend. So what we need to do is we need to actually go over here in the MIDI routing under the device port to DAW, and we're going to have to do this for jack 1 and jack 2. But on scene A, we're doing it on jack 1, and scene B, we're doing it on jack 2, and we'll show you how that works out. Also, if you scroll, you can see which scene you're on. So I'm currently on scene A doing all this stuff. Up until this point, it hasn't mattered, but now on the MIDI output, it's going to matter. So I'm going to show you how that goes. So we're going to go to jack 1, and this is RTP1, or I've renamed it to DINS. So we want to just make sure that this is going to RTP1, which by default it will be. And this is going to RTP2, which by default it is. Now at this point, it's very tempting to click scene B and take a look at jack 2. But before you switch to scene B, you must save. If you do not save on the Playaudio12, you have to save per scene. If you do not save, you're going to run into issues, guaranteed. So the way to save a Playaudio12 is to click in once on the knob on the front of the physical interface. So I'm going to do that right now. You're going to see the LEDs on the front flash twice, and that's going to say that it's confirmed to save. So now we're going to go over to scene B, and I want to make sure scene B looks the same way. So you can see on scene B that jack 1 has no routings, and that's the way it's supposed to be because it's now switched to jack 2, which is the point of the Playaudio12 is to switch computers on the out. So if we go to jack 2, RTP1/XM DINS, we're going to make sure we're on 1 and 2. So those are set up correctly. So I don't have to save it because it's automatically the default settings. So let's go back to scene A. And so now we have Ableton to Playaudio12 via USB set up correctly. And we already had the RTP connections set up because those are two-way. So now we have to just go over to the XM and tell it where to go. So let's go to MIDI routing on our XM. And now our information for the DINS is coming from RTP1. So what I want to do is I want to click on RTP1, scroll down the left side here, and we're going to select all DINS. And we're going to go to RTP2, deselect that one, and we're going to go to all the host ports. And so that's the full part of your MIDI routing. I know I've talked a lot about setting all this up, but in reality, this can be done in maybe less than 5 minutes. So it's a very quick setup, even though my video is probably quite long right now. So that's everything set up. So what does that look like in reality? So say I'm going to take the example now and tack it on of my launch control if I actually want it to have to control Ableton and have Ableton send back out to it. Or any, this works for other DAWs, but I'm going to show you in Ableton. So I'm going to go into the Ableton preferences. So you can press Command comma or Control comma if you're on the Windows side here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my audio. This would be my Playaudio12, of course. And then we're going to go to Link Tempo MIDI. So under here, what we want to do is select, I'm just going to get rid of all of these guys. All right, so under here, you want to select your control surface if you have one that's a normal control surface. So for me, it'd be something like just a launch control right there. And then we select your input, which is going to be RTP2 or XM HS host. And then the same for the output. There we go. So you select both of those, and then we just need to make sure that we have track and remote on for those guys, specifically remote. And we're going to do that for the in and the out ports. So right here we have it track on and remote on, Then we're going to scroll down. This is for the PA12. You can see it's renamed it to the launch control up there. I'm assuming that's what I have plugged into that port, so it may have been my launch pad. And then we can also go down here. You can see it's renamed down here, and we want to put on our track and a remote. Our remote basically lets us jump around markers and that kind of thing, and the track lets you actually trigger things for the individual tracks and control them. And that's all you would have to do. Normally at this point, I must have the other controller plugged in. At this point, you'll see like a red or blue box show up around the top here, the main 8 or whatever, however many your controller has. It'll show up around what your parameters are currently looking at on that controller. So hopefully that helped you out a bit. Now, note that I did go to RTP2. We did rename this to HST, but you do have to go through a step with Audio MIDI setup on your Mac in order for that to rename properly and actually show up in here. So if you look in the description below, you'll see a video for Mac and one for Windows showing you how to do that. I just didn't want to do it during the video because I'd have to disconnect my PA12 temporarily. So hopefully that'll all work out. Just check that out if you want your name set up that way. If you didn't rename or you don't care about the names, then you can just do what I just did and actually select the proper RTP ports that it's connected to. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how to set things up. And then as far as MIDI goes, if you want an input onto a track from one of these MIDI options, you just have to click here. If you want DINs, you'll have to do RTP1 or XM DINs. And if you want the host ports on the XM, you'll either have to do XM host or RTP2, which could be renamed if you have a controller in there. And then MIDI 2, exact same thing. So this is if you want to send out like controlled like program changes or CCs or any bits of information out to those controllers. So hopefully this helps you out kind of see a very common setup from start to finish and all the little details in between of getting that set up. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up at iConnectivity.com/support.